You're watching or listening to Picture Lock, where we focus on film. Now, this audience first met my guest on the State of Black Cinema panel episode, where he thoroughly entertained with his friendly back and forth with friend of the show, DC film critic Tim Gordon. And after a couple of reschedules, I must say I'm really excited. We finally have him back in the studio to talk about his 35 years of industry experience from the rough and what it means to be the director of a film office. Director of the DC Office of Motion Pictures, Television, and Development, Pierre Bagley. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kevin. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm so excited about this conversation. So, one of the things that I always love to do is just to start at the beginning. When did you fall in love with film?
Well, this is really going to date me, but I was a pre-med student at Arizona State in 72, 73, and was just a work study job, frankly. It was a job that was closer to where I was going to school, Arizona State, and I heard, frankly, that they needed to hire black people. This is when affirmative action and television was really starting to come to bear, and they had no black people at the station. So a friend of mine, who is Stan Stovall, by the way, he's the head anchor at WBAL in Baltimore. He's been on the air, but Stan lived across the street from me, and Stan was already in a sports caster, and he said they're hiring, they need a black person. I said, fine. So it was $1.65 an hour, so I went. $1.65 an hour.
Wow.
It was minimum wage at the time.
Okay.
So so I took the job.
Awesome. So that's when you fell in love with film.
Well, you know what I did, Kevin? If you remember, history will tell you about Vietnam was really blowing up at the time, and they had stopped doing student deferments, and they were taking everybody. And I had a lot of friends who were being drafted. Within 6 weeks, they were in Vietnam. Had a lot of friends that got hurt. A lot of friends didn't come home. So we were watching the war. I was working at a CBS affiliate in Phoenix, Arizona. So you were literally watching this play out in real time. And at the time, Watergate was starting to happen with Richard Nixon. And I was literally at least 20 to 25 years younger than anybody else in the station, and the only black person. So I was this sort of radical guy with the big fro that was saying that this wasn't right. And we watched Nixon resign. He was the first president to ever resign over Watergate. And the media, in my view, had a lot to do with that. And I understood then the power of the media. And even though I was a pre-med student on a full ride scholarship, I went to my scholarship committee and said, basically, I'm going to try this media thing. I could sense the power of media, but I didn't want to be in front of the camera. I wanted to be behind the camera because I saw that's where the power was.
Okay. Man, that's really intriguing, just to kind of be alive there's different points in history, and there'll be different, for me, I think 9/11 was my generation's,
Right.
so just to be there on the cutting room floor and kind of get that out there, I'm sure that had to be intriguing.
Right.
All right, so take me to the 70s, Phoenix, Arizona. Now, when I was reading your bio, the phrase "started from the bottom" came to mind, and so I know you're kind of talking about this now, but you started out as a floor crew member. What was that experience like, and then how did it prepare you for the future?
Well, the good thing about it, Kevin, they literally didn't want me there. And so there was no communication. I was a floor crew member at that time. I really couldn't touch a camera. I was there to put up sets and take sets down and kind of sweep the floors. And it was fine with me. I was a sort of a young, angry black man. So I was going to be a doctor, and that's what my passion was at the time. And as I would put on the headsets, and I'd listen to these guys, and I'd watch it, and I just thought there were some things that instantly I felt like I could do this. Frankly, I think that anybody can do anything when they put their minds to it. Things always look complicated, but I was a student who was a pre-med student who I majored in zoology and chemistry. So I was a good student, and so I understood preparation. And so since I was a fly on the wall, I could watch everything go down, and you could actually hear the mistakes, and people admitted them and got in trouble, didn't get in trouble. So I was able to really see this as a fly on the wall. So by the time I started to become a qualified union camera person, I really had a sense of composition and why the guys were late with their picks or out of focus. And so I really trained myself not to do that. And within 18 months, I was technical director of the 6 and 10 o'clock news in a major market, responsible for the 6 and 10 o'clock news.
Wow. Wow. So by 78, you had your own independent production and post house, right? And you actually had some pretty big clients, ABC, Foot Locker, Walmart. What did your production house do, and what was that experience like?
Well, post-production, as it exists today, didn't exist in those days. In those days, the television stations did all the production. The advertisers would come to the TV station, and you'd sit in the control room and you'd do the voiceover and all that sort of thing. Once the computer came about and computerized editing as we know it today, it was still analog, so it was very linear. You had tape and reel-to-reel. But CMX came out with the first computerized system, and it was 1 inch. And before then, it was quad. They were 2-inch reels that was these big, giant 2,000-pound tape machines that were hydraulic and pneumatic and very expensive and very complicated. And once they came out with the 1-inch machine, I had a friend of mine who worked in the station. His father was wealthy, owned an insurance company, and he was an engineer. And he prided himself on being one of the young guns. And he literally borrowed $1 million from his dad and said, Pierre, come with me, and we're going to start what at the time was the first post house in the state of Arizona. So we literally took over all the commercial production. TV stations, as you see today, really never wanted to do production. They only did it for the buy, for the media buy. So they gladly gave up all the production. So we became the first post-production house who did all the commercial production in the state of Arizona.
Wow. That's incredible. So you've always had this entrepreneurial go-get-it spirit, right?
Well, you know, it's about opportunity sort of meets fear. Because what happened, I remember saying to my friends, you know, I was terrified because this job in television, you know, I was pretty successful at it, and it was a great job, you know. And at that time, we were getting paid. I went from $1.65 an hour to about $18,000 a year, and then slowly was creeping up on $30,000 a year, and I was like 19. So it was a great opportunity for me. And then when I was going to go into this post-production thing as a partner for this guy, I said, what if it doesn't work? You know, and I thought, well, at the worst case, I'm going to learn how to lose $1 million. And by then I was 22, and I thought, well,
wow.
Even if I learned how to lose $1 million, there would be a lesson in that. And so we jumped into it. The irony was that my partner was a cocaine addict, and there was no crack. There was, you know, and he imbued in cocaine, and we literally had to put him in a treatment facility, and I became the major operator and the president of the company. So it was a lot of pressure because we had a lot of bills. We spent all the money on gear. So we saved nothing for working capital because we thought everybody was going to knock down our doors, which they did not do. So it was a lot of pressure because there was a lot of times when I was the last one to get a paycheck. So that entrepreneurial spirit was, when I say opportunity meets fear, it's never, when you think about $1 million, you have a note in those days that you're trying to figure out how to pay your staff, and you got to pay the bank.
Right.
And so it was a lot of pressure, but I loved it because I've always felt I could go get a job if I failed.
Right. Man, that's incredible. I tell you one thing, I wish somebody would give me $1 million to go mess up right now.
Yeah.
All right, so 1997, you took your first screenplay to production in the 35 millimeter feature film, The Message.
Right.
And you know, it's funny because even as you were talking just now, you were naming some different things, technology that I have no idea
Right.
what it
Right.
is. So, you know, now we live in more of a digital age. So people that actually shoot on film are becoming more, you know, of a rarity.
Right.
So let's just talk about that experience. What was it like, 1997, shooting a 35 millimeter film? I mean, this is around that time when, you know, all the hot filmmakers that we
Right.
love are coming out. What was that like?
Well, film was then, it is now, still considered the ultimate medium to to shoot on because it was expensive then. And Panavision was a camera system that you couldn't even own. You could only lease or rent a Panavision setup. And I decided that, you know, the old saying is true. No one ever sets out to make a bad film. So everyone, in those days, I had become a very accomplished commercial producer and director. And so you were doing, you know, the Jack in the Box commercials and the Chrysler commercials and Walmart, which at that time was a very small store, and they would come to Arizona only because the weather, they could actually cut grass with their lawnmowers. So I really didn't know much about Walmart. They were certainly not the behemoth they are today. But 35 for me was the medium we shot all the commercials in, and it was the prestige. You know, if you shot on 35, you were, you know, the shizzle, so to speak. You know, so it was not that difficult because when I put this together, I used my own money. It was about $300,000, which was a lot of money even then and a lot of money today because what I did was I took off a year and a half. I wrote this script called The Message. It was about an answer machine that takes over a guy's life that took place in Harlem. And so I went to all my commercial friends, the DPs, the lighting people, the sound people, and said, do you guys want to trade up with me? You know, because everybody wanted to do a feature. And I really wanted to prove to myself whether or not I could do a feature film, a narrative, because, you know, they use the term director and producer so loosely, you know, in television, you know, and since I started there, I'm not dogging them, but, you know, if you're directing the news, that's really not directing in the way that we think of traditional directing. You're more calling sort of preset coordinates, and frankly, if everyone isn't set with you, you're behind and you're going to fail because right. You know, that's a different kind of director. It takes a lot of skill to do it, but it's not the kind of traditional directing we think when we say you're here and this is what you feel and this is what you say. So I wanted to be that kind of a director, and the only way I thought I could do it was to write my own screenplay, come up with my own money, and then go out and see what it was going to be like. And so that's what I did. And the film turned out to be pretty good. You know, we got into the first Urban World Festival, the inaugural festival. At the time, Wesley Snipes and this guy, Jamie Perry, were the two guys who were in the Michael Jackson Bad video. Who's Bad, yeah. Right? And so Jamie Perry was the other guy. It was him and Wesley, and Jamie was the lead in this film. So I learned a lot about directing because there's more to directing than just you stand over there and the lights are here. You have to lead people, you have to be on time, it's just a lot of other skill sets that traditional sort of, you know, nonfiction doesn't require you to do. And so after I did The Message, I was more convinced that, number one, I really loved this industry, and number two, that I wanted to do more narratives.
Okay. Man, this is really cool. I'm enjoying this conversation. Listen, it's been great talking about the past. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back to talk more about the present. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter with our handle @PictureLockShow. We're actually tweeting live. By the time you see this, it won't be live, but we're using the hashtag FilmDC. And like us on Facebook. We'll be right back.